So now that we're recording, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you guys and we'll look at Blackboard together, make sure everybody's on the same page for what needs to be done this week. And then I will give you like some objectives to kind of think through for chapter 2. Okay, so that as you are studying the material and that type of thing, you can be thinking, okay, Dr. Diatley said to make sure to pay attention to this and that type of thing. So, all right, so let me get back over to Blackboard. There we go. Put it in student view, so we're seeing what you guys are seeing. All right, and it sounds like you guys figured out navigation of Blackboard pretty well. So we are in week 2. And so again, the Singer text is linked in here. It's just a PDF. It's a really long one. It's 32 pages. So I'll let you guys decide if you want to copy that off or not. Sorry, now we're sharing, hopefully. There is a note guide that accompanies chapter 2. And the way that I do note guides is it's like partial notes. Okay, so these are the slides that are presented in the lecture. For the most part, we're going to get to chapter 6 and 7 that you're going to see a few differences. But the part of the material has been deleted off of the note guide. And so this provides you guys an opportunity to kind of put pen to paper in this point, because all of the research has said, or with student learning says that being able to write out the material is actually more beneficial from a memory standpoint than just looking at something and memorizing it. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to write out some of these concepts. So in each production scenario, or in each lecture, you will see a production scenario. And so these scenarios are really an attempt to, let's look at this a little more in depth, come on, buddy. Okay, it's not wanting to do anything. I don't want, come on. There we go. Now it's going to be bigger. So this is, I really don't like just presenting the science without tying it back to management of the animal. And because that's really how a lot of our decisions are made, especially in regards to economics. And so these production scenarios, you're going to see one for each chapter that has really put a focus on the importance of a piece of that chapter or subject. So in this scenario, this is literally stuff that we have been through on our ranch. So Tom is my dad, and he absolutely has been too zealous at auctions in the past and bought cows that he knew nothing about, and to the dismay of his daughters. So anyway, these are things that will hopefully bring an applicable opponent to the science and help you guys master them in more detail. And so these note guides are just partial notes where you guys can go in and kind of write in the actual terminology or the verbiage associated with each of the concepts. And so that, let me go back here. So that is the note guides. And then you've got links to the online videos. And so these should just click right into YouTube for you, where the online lectures will have the full notes associated with it. And then at the end of each week is going to be a quiz that is in Blackboard. The quizzes are going to range anywhere between like 8 and probably 25 points. And you're going to definitely see a quiz each week, and you may on some weeks see a quiz and an activity. Okay, but you will you'll definitely have plenty of time and warning to get that done. And I believe, I think I told you guys this in the emails and stuff last week, that all of our due dates are always going to be on Friday at the end of day. So Friday at 11:59 p.m. That is when everything will be due. So just make sure to have that in your schedule. And if you guys have the ability to kind of block out time during the week to work on this class, that is where I've seen students be very successful in the past. So it kind of creates some space for you to master the material. All right, any questions about Blackboard, how quizzes work, how the class is going to work, that type of thing? All right, you guys said it was pretty straightforward, so I'm happy to hear that. All right, so let's talk about, I'm just going to bring up the note guide because it's kind of easy to look at, and we'll look at it together. But let's talk through some of the big stuff to make sure you have a handle on in chapter 2. There we go. All right, so hopefully you guys are looking at the note guide. So with chapter 2, as we look at the female reproductive system, the things that you absolutely need to have memorized, be able to write out, be able to draw out, forwards, backwards, anything, is the female reproductive system. All right, so sometimes the reproductive system gets simplified down to the reproductive tract, okay? And that is not true. So the reproductive tract, so the vagina, the cervix, the uterus, the ovaries, that's all definitely part of the system. But those things very much respond to two other organs. So two other tissues that produce hormones. So one is the hypothalamus, that is in the base of the brain. And the second one is the anterior pituitary gland or the posterior pituitary gland. Together, those two components are called the pituitary. And the pituitary sets right below the hypothalamus, and it is really directly above the roof of your mouth if you need some orientation for where that organ sits in your body. And so the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the ovary and the reproductive system all make up the female reproductive system. So my goal for you guys is that if you get a question of like, if you were a sperm cell and you were deposited in the vagina, what is your path? That you could do that without any issues, okay? You would have that whole path memorized. So, and the reason for this is because chapter 2 and chapter 3 both, but we're talking about chapter 2 this week, is really providing some foundation. So this is where memorization should come in. Because when we get to chapter 4, chapter 5, and then the rest of the semester where we're talking through different management scenarios, you guys need to know without having to go back and look at what the vagina is and what it does and what hormones it responds to. Okay, and so chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5 are what we call foundational chapters in this class, and that's where you can spend a lot of time memorizing. So if you guys are flashcard people, this is a great chapter to start on. All right, I think what is the online flashcard thing? Is it Quizlet?
Quizlet.
No. Quizlet? Okay. That, if you're an online person that likes those type of tools, that's a great one. I personally am like, go find me some recipe cards and write them out myself. Okay. So, but making sure you have a good handle on the anatomy of the female reproductive system is a great objective to make sure you guys check off before you take the quiz on Friday. The reproductive system, or the reproductive tract in particular, so the lower part of that tract that includes the vagina and the cervix and the uterus, is made up of a tubal system. Okay, and those tubes have certain layers, and so that's what we start to look through in the first part of this lecture. So making sure you have a good handle on what those layers are and their function is going to be really important to master this chapter. All right, and then After the tubal system, we really get into the anatomical placement. So we in this class, I always find it easier for an orientation standpoint to start from the outside of the animal and work in. Okay, so if we're looking at the reproductive tract, okay, so the part of the reproductive system that is in the back of the animal, right? We start with the clitoris and the vulva that are outside anatomical structures. And then we move through the vagina, the cervix, the uterus, uterine horns, oviduct, and the ovary. Okay, and all of those structures that are inside the body cavity are suspended in place by the broad ligament. And so you'll also see the broad ligament come up towards the end of this chapter or the end of these lectures. And there's different pieces of the broad ligament that becomes really important as well. So this lecture is going to step you through each anatomical structure. It's going to give you a little background about the characteristics that make up the structure, and then it's also going to tell you some of its big functions. Okay, so spend some time here, and especially going back and studying this so that you have a good handle on it. All right. We spend lots of time talking about the uterus because with different species, they have different types of uteri. So cattle and sheep tend to have a bicornuate uterus, whereas like humans tend to have a simplex uterus. So humans and primates. And so those are going to have similar functions for sure, but the orientation is going to be much different. All right, and then towards the end of the lecture, we talk specifically about the oviduct and the ovary. And so the ovary is the female gonad. All right, so when we talk about the hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis, the gonad for the female is going to be the ovary. And so that gonadal structure becomes really important because it's going to be the structure that is going to respond to things coming from the pituitary and from the hypothalamus. Okay, so it's going to respond to luteinizing hormone and to oxytocin and to a lot of other different hormones. In response to that, it also is so sophisticated that it has the ability to create a hormone in response to something coming from the pituitary gland. And so that's why we call the ovary the gonadal structure. So it's the female gonad. And in addition to responding and creating hormones and secreting hormones into the blood system, it also houses the female gametes. Okay, and so gametes, again, are going to be the female genetics. So the copy of the female genetics. And so those are going to be those genetics, the DNA is going to be housed in the nucleus of gametic cells that are arrested in meiosis 1 in the ovary. Okay, so keep in mind, females are born with all of the with all of the oocytes or eggs that they're going to need for their entire life. All right, and then we start talking about some differences between species. Okay, we'll talk another point that you guys can add to your list of things to make sure you have down by the end of chapter 2 is the difference between a corpus luteum or a CL and a follicle. Okay, and so the corpus luteum is going to produce progesterone in large quantities, whereas the follicle is going to be a different structure, but also located on the ovary, and it is going to be producing estradiol or estrogen. And then we end this chapter talking about the broad ligament and why it's important. And then we circle back to that production scenario. And so with that production scenario, we'll break it down question by question, and we'll bring things that we talked about in lecture into this production scenario. And hopefully that will cement those concepts in greater detail for you. All right. So those are kind of some tips and tricks for chapter 2. Again, I highly recommend you can do this in whatever order is best for you, but doing them both is what I would suggest. So either do the note guide and watch the lectures first and then read the chapter, or vice versa. Okay. So one thing that I have come across, and it tends to come up in this class because this is really the only class that I require a textbook in anymore, is I think and you guys can confirm this, I'm curious about what you think. I assume you guys know how to read a textbook and take notes, and I've been proven wrong on that a couple of times in the past. So what is your guys' comfort level with being able to read a textbook and take notes? Is that something you're pretty comfortable with or not? What do you think? Okay, it's okay. Thanks, Marlon. Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that, like, with taking notes out of the textbook, maybe if we just had like some main chapters to like focus on and stuff.
Okay. Yep. And so with that, we are going to have, we're only going to be looking at one chapter a week. And then there's, with chapter 5, we're actually going to spend 2 weeks on that material. So it's, Marissa put on here, not a big fan. Sorry, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you've got to do this. Okay. If you guys want to get the most out of this class, and to do well, honestly, there's so much detail about each one of these processes and stuff. I can't physically get it into a lecture. If I did that, you guys would be watching like 3 and 4 hours worth of lecture videos a week. Okay, so it tends to be a little bit easier to have you guys do part of this learning by reading. And so one thing that, let me bring up the chapter 2 PDF, and maybe this is something we can walk through really quickly because we've got a few minutes. There we go. Come on. There we go. Okay, so I'm hoping you guys are looking at the PDF of chapter 2. Right, so one of the ways that, I'll just tell you the way that I read textbooks and take notes, okay? And if that works for you, awesome. And I'm more than willing to work with you on this. If you guys wanted to do an office hour or something like that, that's totally fine. So what I end up doing is I will go through and definitely read kind of the take-home message. The Singer text is really nice because it gives you like, okay, this is the big component of this chapter. Okay, and then it's going to break it down into further detail as you go through the chapter. But one thing that I do is I will go through and actually outline the chapter first. So I won't get into the deep reading. So I'll, write out like big categories like take-home message. And then the next big category would be the tubal structures of the female track. Okay, and then the next big section would be, we did tubal structures, so it's going to be after this. Okay, it's going to be like the development of the repro track. Okay. And so I'll go through and outline the chapter first, and then I will go back and read each section in depth. Okay. And when I take notes on something, because I don't know if you guys experience this, but when I was a student, I would just get overwhelmed by the material to where everything in the paragraph seemed important, right? So I'd come back and everything in the paragraph would be highlighted or underlined. So I struggled with that. And so I will intentionally not highlight stuff or underline stuff until I've reread this like 3 or 4 times. And I will do that for each paragraph. So this process does take some time. Okay, so I'll read through this paragraph here 3 or 4 times, and then I will back out of it, look at my outline and be like, okay, so what is the important piece of this paragraph that I need to pull out? And then I will do that in like 2 or 3 bullet points per paragraph. Okay, and those bullet points is what I will go back in and highlight. And so those bullet points may be things that go on flashcards. It may be things that are also in these yellow boxes, because the Singer book does a really great job of taking the big components and putting them in the yellow boxes to try to break up the material. All right, so that is just a little bit of insight into how I handle this stuff. You guys may do it differently. I would highly suggest blocking out some time to do this and work in 25 to 30-minute chunks, okay? So the research has shown that we can really only comprehend between 20 and 30 minutes of intensive material at one point in time. And then you've got to have some time for that material to actually go from short-term memory to long-term memory, okay? And here's the kicker. I'm going to stop sharing because I want you guys to look at me, because this is serious. To get stuff to go from short-term memory to long-term memory is moving that information in different parts of the brain. And to do that, you have to sleep. That's when information is translated from short-term to long-term memory. All right. So I may be the only professor that tells you this, but sleep is a really important part of this class, okay? I just gave you guys permission to sleep, all right? So just keep those type of things in mind. These are kind of life hack type things, but that movement of information from short-term memory to long-term memory is really what we're interested in, okay? All right, questions, comments? Happy to troubleshoot reading a textbook with you guys anytime. Awesome. Okay. I'm gonna hang out.
Question.
Yeah, go for it, Caleb.
The textbook, I'm assuming, can be found on the student section of the Blackboard.
Yes, in the syllabus. So
In the syllabus.
Yep.
Okay. I
Yep.
assume so. Okay.
yeah,
Thank
just
you.
make sure it's the 3rd edition. I think you can, I'm sure you guys have more links to where to buy textbooks than I do. I honestly kind of stopped getting it at the bookstore because they were like $50 higher than other places. So Amazon, some of the textbook folks, you could also probably eBay it and get a used copy if you wanted. Just make sure, guys, that it's the 3rd edition, okay? 3rd edition.
It says that I don't have access to the syllabus and I had to send a request. Does that sound right?
Maybe, are you signed in with your Chico State login information?
I am, but it's been up for a while, so maybe it expired.
Did the rest of you guys have issues with the syllabus?
No.
No, just
Probably just
switch
me.
your email account.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. But meanwhile, here, let me just take this text and I'll dump it into the chat. So this is the information for the textbook. Yeah, so I think because we are working through the Google Suite stuff, like one of the conditions is that you have to be signed in to your Chico State account to view a lot of the stuff that we're going to use on Google Docs and the Google Suite. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pause recording.